Welcome to Dextercast, the episode where we explore the different perspectives on the issues that matter. I am Alice Westberg, today your host and guide. And in this episode of Beyond Human, I'm going to use the movie Interview with the Vampire and investigate the vampire and their post-human and affective possibilities. I want to try to understand the vampire, specifically the character Louise in the movie Interview with the Vampire as a post-human being. The vampire challenges the binary distinction of human, non-human, as they become someone with human attributes but develop physical and intellectual features beyond that human. And of course, they feed on blood and all that. I will argue that the vampire condition, as portrayed in Louise, is not some fixed, trapped in the past, undead creature, but is constantly developing beyond his former human condition. The vampire can interact and approach the world in another level as they create a reality outside the normative frameworks of temporality, society, and ideology. Louis' search of understanding his condition as a vampire reflects the post-human process of becoming. By studying the vampire Louis, I seek answers to the questions: what can the vampire teach us about post-humanism? And how can Louis' vulnerability be a possibility for an affirmative post-human project? The movie Interview with the Vampire is based on the novel written by Anne Rice and has come to be a gothic vampire classic. The story is told by Louise, a 200-year-old vampire who gives the human interviewer a close insight into his reality. One might say that the movie is made through the vampire gaze or perspective. Perspectivism is an epistemological way of seeing and understanding knowledge. It's based on the idea that a diversity of perspectives lead to different kinds of knowledge. This concept has been used by feminist philosophers as Rosi Braidotti and Donna Haraway, who claims that situatedness, like for example social positions based on gender, class, or ethnicity, etc., matters in the production of knowledge. Anne-Marie Moll uses this concept in her text Ontological Politics, but claims that we must understand not just the perspectives, but the reality as multiple realities. Through the encounter with Louise, we can understand some of his life as a reality that exists and is being made through his action, just as the reality of the interviewer is being made through his. An important distinction is being made by Moll, as she claims that ontologies, multiple realities, are performances. Indeed, perspectivism did release itself from the monopolitical view of reality and knowledge and created a pluralist way of acknowledging that there are many ways of experiencing the reality. But it did not multiply the reality. Ontopolitics is a composite term of ontology and politics, whereas ontology is a traditional philosophic term about the possibilities of or knowledge or of being. This combined with politics underlines the active condition of being. This means that our way of being shapes the conditions of our reality. Creating realities is, in other words, an ongoing process. Moll means that ontopolitics relies on the idea that instead of different bodies and eyes observing and experiencing the untouchable reality in the middle, multiple realities are being manipulated and created through different performances and interventions. Judith Butler means that our performances and epistemological capacity to understand life or other realities depends on frames. Frames work in a normative and performative way of organizing ontologies and dividing them into recognizable and non-recognizable lives. In the encounter between the human interviewer and the vampire Louise appears a human possibility to understand ontopolitics and a post-human becoming. The vampire, moving in other temporalities, could be found living in his own reality apart from the normative society, but also interacts and gets affected by human times and conditions, as, for example, capitalism. Savransky would call the vampire a solitary entity, as someone inhabiting worlds other than the modern West. The vampire can world their world everywhere. They possess the ability to understand and to move in different ontologies. When Luis becomes a vampire, he struggles to find a way to come to terms with his new vampire condition. As the story goes, we understand that it is a constant process of becoming something beyond human. It is a process of becoming post-human. Posthumanism consists of different theories and comments on the ongoing, changeable condition of human becoming and being. When Luis is offered to become a vampire, he is offered to be released from the pain of living. Some could argue that the vampire would be more like a transhuman. The transhuman seeks to implement the ideal from the enlightenment of the improved, reasonable individual who is liberated from embodiment, aging and death. I claim, on the other hand, that Luis goes through a transition of human, transhuman and then posthuman, as his abilities extend beyond human but are also inflected by flaws, complexities and struggles. The vampire is not a fixed character but develops with time. Luis does not become a vampire as if he changed species. He is a becoming of the human. Donna Haraway's posthuman cyborg reaches beyond technology and biology, culture, nature, human and animal, fact and fiction. This means that the posthuman possesses trans-agency, and this means that it is constantly becoming. When Luis is recently transformed to a vampire, he approaches all things around him in a new way. All things come to life, and he activates a sensorial connection to other beings beyond the human condition of recognizing only what is apprehensible. Braidotti defines the posthuman condition as the convergence of posthumanism and post-anthropocentrism. In the movie, the human becomes an antagonist. The journalist, while listening and recognizing the reality of the vampire, he connects with the complex multiplicity of Luis and opens to other agents of the world. Then, the fate of the journalist suddenly becomes post-human too. As at the end of the movie, he gets bitten by Luis' companion Lestat. Indeed, Interview with the Vampire is a dark story. Luis does not come to terms with his post-human condition. Gothic theory and fiction can be used to explain the horror and fear human feels of the dark unknown and the non-normative ways of being. Luis' fear of becoming more than human and his new condition darkens his mind so he can't see the post-human possibilities in his life. This leads us to the big question: how do you do post-humanism? The becoming of the post-human vampire marks, as Braidotti would say, a qualitative transformation of our shared sense of becoming in time, end of quote. As the vampire lives in other temporality, because they don't die, they will change and get affected by advanced capitalism and climate changes, as well as all beings and species on Earth. The cultural representation of vampire also changes in human times. From the monstrous Dracula of Ben Stoker, we find Louis, a vulnerable, likable and sympathetic being. Louis suffers, and I suffer with him. Butler explains about different possibilities of encountering with what is life and what is not. As the journalist hears the dark story of Louis, he sympathizes with him. And with the words of Judith Butler, Louis is being recognized as grievable. Butler means that the recognition is an act of practice that happens between subjects, and the grievability makes possible the recognition of the being. In other words, Louis' struggle and complexity makes him understandable as a being, not human, but post-human. Going back to the question about how to do post-humanism, this new vampire subjectivity of Louis becomes a post-human possibility. Louis' vulnerability expresses his capacity to affect and to be affected by others. Braidotti argues that the affirmative project of posthumanism depends on reworking and expressing humility towards the negative experiences of the never-ending process of becoming in this dark historical time that we're in. An ethical empowering mode increases one's potential to take on this world. Affirmative ethics do not deny pain, violence, and suffering, but rather propose another way of dealing with it to prevent some kind of nihilistic self-destruction. The room in Hotel St. Mark, where the interview is taking place, becomes a plane of encounter to understand, maybe mostly for the human, a vampiric ontology and a posthuman condition. But it's also Louis who wants to tell his story to reach an adequate understanding of his condition as a vampire. If this openness can lead to other encounters, then maybe he can come to terms with his posthuman condition and turn this vulnerability into a generative force. To Louise, if you are still wandering around out there, I just want to say one thing. There is hope in you. Join the posthuman force of joy. In the upcoming episodes of Beyond Human, we will continue to explore literature, film, and video games from posthumanist and ontological perspectives. Next time, we will look at the video game The Last of Us.